Alrighty YouTube, it's your boy Zxous, and we're back with another Goddess of Victory Nikke video. And in today's video, we're finally going to be doing this tier list that a lot of people have been asking me to do. And it's basically the overload prioritized tier list. I think a lot of players, especially like more of the newer players, are now reaching that overload gear. Obviously not like new players in the sense where they came last week. I'm talking about maybe from the half anniversary till now. You guys are probably starting to get your first overload gear or something like that, and a lot of people are asking what character should I prioritize to get their overload gear. Now there are disclaimers, so if you haven't skipped to the end yet, just hold out a bit before you do skip to the end. I mean, you don't need to skip to the end, I guess, because the tier list is already here, right? I did put this together, so let me just go to disclaimers. It's fine. Actually, before we get into that, make sure you guys subscribe and like. We did hit 6.8 thousand subscribers, and we're really trying to get to 7,000 subscribers by the end of the month. And right now, if you guys subscribe, it'll be more than guaranteed. So go ahead, take a second out of your time to subscribe, because your boy's literally lit. So yeah. So the first thing I want to point out for the disclaimers of this tier list, this is based on clearly characters that are good and bad as well. Like, not exactly based on if they're good or bad, but them being good or bad is also implemented into this tier list, right? I'm not gonna have a character who's very sorry, whose kit clearly requires overload gear, not for them to even be broken, but just their kit requires overload gear, and then put them in the top, right? So characters who are just generally not that good, but also benefit heavily from overload gear will probably be low on this tier list or high on this tier list. It really depends on, you know what I'm talking about, right? Another thing, this is not in a sense where everybody at the very top, I'm saying overload them first before you overload anybody else in the second or last tier, right? This is not it, right? When I'm doing the overload tier list, it's the people who really benefit the most from the overload gear and are good with it, like good in the game once they get it, or even if they have it, right? So yeah, I think those are really all the disclaimers I need to go over. And yeah, we're not going to talk about every unit, but I'm going to try to summarize it as well as I can. So obviously in the highest tier we have primary overload gear, the second tier is secondary overload gear, and the last tier is last option overload gear. So what that means is the characters you should probably focus on, the second characters who or like secondary options who are good to have it but not your main option to overload gear, and then obviously your last option if you've already overloaded everybody else and you want to overload a character there in last option. The characters in the first tier, right? Alice, Scarlet, A2, 2B, Modernia, Maxwell, Guillotine, Snow White, Laplace, and Power. These are characters who are the better DPSs in the game, and some of these characters, for example, Power and Laplace, benefit heavily from overload gear because they are boss killers. That's literally why, from literally where Maxwell is all the way to Power, that's why those characters are there, because they become insane boss killers, or they are insane boss killers but require overload gear to do the damage you're looking for, right? Snow White without overload gear is just not going to do damage compared to Snow White with overload gear. Same thing goes for Laplace, same goes for Power, same goes for Maxwell. These are boss killers, right? Their whole purpose is to nuke the boss in one hit, basically, and these characters have the percentage to do that, so that's why they're there. Characters like Guillotine and Modernia are just natural DPSs who, you know, benefit insanely from overload gear with normal attack damage, and just their damage in general, right? Guillotine's a burst skill and stuff like that, but obviously the more attack you can get on somebody like Guillotine and Modernia, the way better they are. 2B and A2 is essentially the same thing. 2B is kind of like Scarlet in a sense of why she needs overload gear. She doesn't actually benefit much from overload gear, so that's why like people might be like, why is she in primary overload gear? Because she doesn't really benefit so much from overload gear, but you definitely want to overload gear your 2B, right? She's a character who will be very broken with it. Not like insane, like if you don't have overload gear for her, then she's trash, but literally overload gear, you do get benefit and value out of it, but it's not really necessary for that character. So I guess in that case I can put it in secondary overload gear, right? Obviously A2 is a character who does fantastic damage with the normal attack, and the whole thing with A2 is you want to have her have charge damage, charge speed, attack percentage or whatever on your overload gear, right? Elemental damage, those little things from the overload gear, right? So those are the things that are going to help her fantastically, and that same thing also goes towards Alice, right? Alice is also a character who you want to have charge damage, charge speed, like kind of build around that, right? Make her damage insanely, like her damage insane, and the only way to really do that is with overload gear. right? So those are why those characters are in primary, right? In secondary, all these characters here, I should have probably organized it, but these characters in secondary are sub DPSs or healers, right? Now, healers don't really benefit from the effects of Overload Gear in terms of attack percentage and the crit damage and crit rate, but you do still get stats from Overload. And a lot of the healers here, there are some healers in last option, I'm going to break it down right now. A lot of the healers in the secondary Overload Gear tier, like Rapunzel, Noise, Blanc, these are healers who, you know, well, I guess not really Noise, right? I don't want to put I'm going to put Noise down here, not Noise, right? But Rapunzel, Blanc, and Mary also. These are characters, same as Pepper and this Mary as well. These are characters who are healing consistently, right? And they heal off their final max HP. Obviously, the more HP you can get them, and you get way more, or you get HP from Overload Gear more than just without Overload Gear, right? The more HP they have, the better heals they're doing. So characters like that who heal consistently are the characters who will benefit from Overload Gear, not in terms of the secondary effects they get, but the stats in general, right? I would love to overload my Rapunzel over anybody in the last option because it's going towards my heals, right? My heals are going to be more increased if I have more HP, and I get more HP from Overload Gear as well, right? Not from the effects, but from just the base stats. That's the reason why she's there, right? Characters like Helm, Nylister, Rupee, right? Those characters specifically are just burst 2 DPSs, realistically the best burst 2 DPSs there are in the game right now. So that's the only reason why they're in secondary Overload Gear. A lot of people love running a burst 2 DPS, having like a full DPS comp, and that's the only reason why you would give them Overload Gear, because they do benefit from it. Obviously, Helm and Nylister more than the Rupee, all their skills actually benefit off of or deal damage of final attack, and the final attack percentage and the like crit damage, crit rate percentages that you can get off Overload Gear will help those characters. Rupee's a character who is somewhat of a supporter for herself and the team, but she still does great damage because she's giving herself a massive attack buff. So why not take advantage and give her Overload Gear as well to do more damage, right? Summer Anise. Now this one was hard for me because I didn't know if I wanted to put her in primary Overload Gear or secondary Overload Gear, and the only reason why I say that is because she's a sub DPS, but her DPS is obviously outrageous, right? She does actually deal damage off final attack, right? So Overload Gear helps her so much, right? The more attack she has, the stronger she's going to be, and she does insane damage. But again, people might use her as a support. Some people might, I mean, you're still getting the DPS, so I'm gonna put her in primary Overload Gear. You still are getting the DPS, even if you like are putting her on the team for the support to Scarlet, you're still going to get fantastic damage from her if you are using her as the second burst 3 character. So I'm going to put Anise in primary Overload Gear because she benefits way too much from it, right? Characters like Haran, characters like Drake, the D, Noir. Well, Noir really doesn't need it. Realistically she doesn't need it, but I believe actually she gives a, let me just double check. I'm not 1000% sure. Is it off? No. Yeah, no, she doesn't really need it. Noir doesn't really need it. This is the last option. I gave it to my Noir just because I knew it was a character I'm using all the time. That's another reason. I probably should have said that in the beginning, right? If it's a team you use all the time and you want to Overload Gear them, go for it. Noir is a character I use all the time. That's why I gave her Overload Gear. But she's also a character who doesn't really need it, realistically. But yeah, D, Drake, Haran, Brid, right? Even Summer Neon are characters who benefit from Overload Gear because they are what you would call a sub DPS, right? I guess early on Haran is a main DPS, but late game she's a sub DPS. D isn't really like a sub DPS option, but when it comes to bosses, she definitely is a damage dealer, right? And she will benefit from Overload Gear with, you know, bosses, right? So that's why she's there as well, right? So that kind of covers everyone in the secondary Overload Gear, right? And then obviously in the last option, Overload Gear, there's characters, these characters really don't benefit from Overload Gear besides just the stats, and the stats are just helping them, you know, get more stats. It's not like the healers where, you know, increasing their stats is helping their skills, right? I mean, maybe for some of them, right? Like Senti is down there. Senti gives a shield off her max HP, right? So obviously having Overload, you get more HP, and the shield is going to be more tankier, but because the percentage of the skill is so low, it's not really going to make a difference. You don't get that much more HP from having Overload Gear, right? Well, technically you do, right? Because a level 0 Overload has more HP than a level 5 T9 manufacturing Overload, right? Apparently. So realistically, it's not going to be that big, but you know, there's that. Characters like Litter, I know a lot of people are like, what is this girl doing? Isn't she one of the best characters in the game? She doesn't care really much about overload, right? Characters like Litter is a prime example. This is a great example. Litter is a character who you only want her for her skills, right? She is a complete support. All her skills benefit you. How do I word this actually? Let me word it like this. Somebody who has a core 7 max overload Litter, skill level 10, will be doing the same job as a no dupe Litter with no overload gear skill level 10, right? So as long as the skill is increased, then you're going to be doing the same thing as something that's completely maxed out, right? Because her skills are just support buffs, right? Recover, the cover HP, attack buff, and then attack crit damage, crit rate, or max ammo capacity buffs. None of those actually have to do with your actual stats. So character like Litter and a lot of other characters here like Polly, right? You know, Novel, those are characters who don't really need overload, right? There's some DPSs in here, like Maiden is there, I know Guilty is there, but these are characters who don't really need overload gear, right? Remember, Guilty, for example, she's actually the strongest burst 2 DPS, but she only gets strong from her first skill, right? She doesn't really need overload gear. The first skill, as long as you level up that first skill, you're going to have the damage, right? And then again, there's like a lot of other DPSs here who, like Maiden, Isabel, these are characters who are just not that great. That's the only reason why they're not in like secondary overload gear. I wouldn't want you guys to give overload gear to characters that just are not needing it, or characters who are just not going to be that useful, right? Especially late game, right? So that's why there's a lot more characters in last option, because these are the characters who either just you want them for nothing but their kit, or you just are not really going to use them as much, right? But it's mainly for like you just want them for their kit. Everybody secondary overload gear benefits from it with their skill and their stats, and then everyone in primary just benefit from it completely, right? It just helps and it transcends the character essentially. So you guys definitely let me know what you think. I know some people are gonna, you know, I know somebody's gonna like be like milk in last option. Foolish, right? When you guys give your opinions, please try to go off of, you know, actual, you know, facts besides just I like Milk, she needs to be at the top, right? I like Volume, she needs to be at the top, right? Like, you know, because a lot of people love some of these characters and they're just never that good, right? I'm sorry, it's the truth, right? Miranda, right? Miranda literally is a character who only has support mechanics, but a Miranda lover will be like primary overload gear, right? I don't want you guys really doing that, because that's gonna, you know, tweak some people's minds and be like, oh, maybe I should build Miranda because I seen the one comment, right? So definitely be mindful of that for the other people watching the video. But you guys let me know what you think, right? If you just skip to the end, right? This is the end of the video. If you did just skip to the end, even though it was there from the beginning and you didn't really hear my reasonings, then I don't really know what to say. But yeah, if you want to go back and hear out the reasonings, they'll probably make you understand a bit more why characters are there. I didn't even talk about Dorothy, but Dorothy, the character who obviously her burst skill, spammable burst skill, essentially burst 1 character. It is spammable and it's based off her attack, so overload gear helps her out a lot, right? So yeah, that's really it. You guys let me know what you think. It's your boy Zxous, and I'm out. Later. Peace.